afternoon and welcome to the next concurrent session of the day. So here's the thing, the science and process of having difficult conversations. Our presenter today is Dr. Rachel Gallardo. Dr. Rachel Gallardo is the Department Head of Psychology and Anthropology at Blind College. She received her PhD in Industrial and Organizational Psychology and has spent 10 years in corporate human resources before teaching in a higher education setting. If you do have any questions for the presenter during the session, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom room screen, and we will address them at the end of the talk. On that note, I will hand it over to our presenter.
Thank you, Sarah. And hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be presenting on this topic today. Let's hope that technology works out for us. That way we can address a very important issue that so many of us have challenges with. And full disclosure, I still struggle with this from time to time, but I do think it's important that we understand why some conversations can be so challenging. And then I'm going to give you a small tool that you can use to use while you're having to have some of those difficult conversations. So just to kind of give you a lay of the land of what we'll be discussing for the next 45 minutes or so, we'll talk about why some conversations are hard. We're going to get into a little bit of biology. So if you're not really a science fan, we're just going to put our toe in the water. We're not going to jump all in. And then I'm going to give you the GROW models for success. And then we're going to address some of those, but Rachel, what if situations. All right, so here we go. What I love about this topic is that it's applicable not only in our professional lives with students and colleagues and leadership that we have to report to, but it's also very pertinent to the people that are in our personal lives as well. So whether that be our spouse, our kids, our family members, friends, neighbors, whatever, you can use this particular tool and you can use this information to help you have difficult conversations with anybody that you may encounter. So first and foremost, why are some conversations so hard? Well, there's two solid reasons as far as why. Both of them are emotionally based. So the first one is that it's embarrassing. Sometimes it's really hard to have difficult conversations with somebody. I've had to have conversations about people and their body odor. I've had conversations about plagiarism, conversations about, hey neighbor, I need to tell you something that I saw your kid do. And those can be really difficult topics to broach with somebody else. Sometimes there's a lot of anger that is involved with those elements of embarrassment. And sometimes there's just general confusion. So you feel kind of lost as far as, I don't even know where to begin. I don't even know how to start this conversation. And so all of that kind of builds up into that embarrassing factor. The other avenue of this is that, let's face it, there's fear. We don't know how the other person is going to respond. We don't know what situation is going to emerge after the conversation. Having to have this conversation can be stressful enough as it is, on top of the fact that the situation that's going on might be really stressful. I don't know about you guys, but we've got midterms right around the corner. And if there's an issue of plagiarism, whenever people are already stressed out, and then you add a difficult topic on top of that, you have increased stress, and all of that boils over, and it can be a really, really difficult situation for all parties involved. So from a biological perspective, everything that we do, literally anything and everything you can possibly think of, is because of our nervous system. And so here's our little biology lesson for the day. Your nervous system is broken down into your central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord, and your peripheral nervous system. Your peripheral nervous system is then broken down to your autonomic nervous system and your somatic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system is responsible for all of those involuntary functions that our body just does. So lungs, heart, digestion, liver, kidneys, things like that. Your somatic nervous system is responsible for movements, your legs, writing, chewing, talking to other people. So whenever we're talking about our emotions, all of that is driven through our autonomic nervous system. Because whenever you can feel yourself getting angry, feel yourself becoming happy, feel yourself getting sad, those aren't really elements that you can control. It's something that you automatically experience and just kind of manifests out within you. And on that note, your autonomic nervous system then breaks down into your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. And when we're talking about the psychology of emotions, what's going on with us mentally and why some of those record items are being played, it's due to the sympathetic or the parasympathetic nervous system. So when we talk about your sympathetic nervous system, this is your fight or flight system. So anytime that you are in a high emotional state, whether that emotional state is positive or negative, your sympathetic nervous system is in play. We know this because there's an increase in heart rate, there's an increase in blood flow. If you're in a really fearful situation, your brain has told your amygdala that we are in a stressful situation, release all of the adrenaline possible, break down those sugars, break down those fats. We've got to give her energy to get out of the situation. And so your sympathetic nervous system is constantly moving, and it's in play whenever we're in a high emotional state. When you're in a parasympathetic nervous system, this is when you're in your more relaxed state. Whenever you don't have any high emotions going on, you're just kind of there. Some of our students like to call it Netflix and chill, which from my standpoint, literally is I'm watching Netflix sitting on the couch. So this is your parasympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate is normal, your blood flow is normal. And generally there's not this overarching play of words or just different thoughts that keep popping into your mind. You're generally in a relaxed state. And hopefully this is where we reside most of the time. If you are constantly having to use your sympathetic nervous system, you're constantly in a high emotional state, you can actually build yourself into a state of fatigue. You can create adrenal fatigue. And when that happens, that means your adrenal gland is not capable of producing the hormones necessary to help you in a fight or flight situation. So we want to try to get into this parasympathetic nervous state. We want to try to keep this part of our nervous system activated the most, because ultimately this is what is going to help us have these difficult conversations. Unfortunately, though, whenever we're having a difficult conversation, sometimes the sympathetic nervous system takes over, and we've got to figure out a way to keep the parasympathetic nervous system in play. And I'm going to give you a tool for how to do that. First and foremost, though, before we talk about this tool, I can't stress enough the importance of timing, not only for you, but also for the other person. So anytime you go to have a conversation with somebody, something that you should ask is this the right time for us to be discussing it? Have you eaten? I don't know about you guys, but hangry is a real thing for me. If I haven't eaten, there is a serious mood shift, and I'm not in a really good position to have a conversation with somebody, or for them to even have a conversation with me unless I'm not hungry. Are you overly tired? Maybe you didn't get enough sleep the night before. Maybe this particular issue was so severe that it kept you up all night long. Well, the next day, whenever you're tired, it's probably not the best time for you to have that conversation. Maybe we need to put it off one more day before we approach that person and have that dialogue. Are you super stressed out? So like many of us, we've got midpoint of the semester is rolling around next week, or maybe it's upon you right now. If I were to have a difficult conversation with somebody, it's probably not a really good time to do it unless it's urgent, because they're really stressed out. Maybe they're not in the right frame of mind. Maybe they're not eating right. They're not sleeping right because they are so stressed out. So we just have to be really self-aware of what is going on and make sure that we're in the right place to have this conversation. And again, also being mindful of the other person to make sure that they're in a good place to have the conversation. Okay. So whenever you do go to have these difficult and challenging conversations with somebody, let's say you need to talk to a student about plagiarism. The thing that you've got to look at is you want to make sure that you're going in with the right goals. So we're going to talk about the GROW model. GROW, all will stand for something different. So first and foremost, before you ever sit down to have this conversation with somebody, you should really and truly write down what your goals are for the conversation. What do you hope to accomplish? What are some realistic things that can be put in place? What's an appropriate timetable for there to be some sort of change? And writing out these goals, there's something that happens whenever you actually put head to pen to paper or head to finger to keyboard, however you take notes, and actually list those things out. When you're doing that, you're actually moving your brain from that overly sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system which is going to help you think more logically and clearly about not only the situation, but the outcomes that you hope to have occur. What are some of the expectations that other people may have out of you? And also, who else needs to know about this? So if there's an issue with a student plagiarizing an assignment in your class, is this a situation that it can be resolved with just you and the student? Has the student done this before and now maybe it needs to be escalated to the department chair or to assistant dean, whatever your processes are? So really stop and think, who all needs to be in the room when I have this conversation? And once you have those things mapped out, then you can go into it with a more logical perspective, and you can have clearer goals for what you want to do. In all of our courses, we have student learning outcomes. It's very similar whenever you go to have a conversation with somebody. You want to have clear outcomes for what you hope that conversation will accomplish. The second step to all of this, so now we move on to our R, is you want to find out what really and truly is the reality of the situation. And sometimes this can be the hardest thing to do. We as human beings, we are very quick sometimes to make assumptions. We come into a situation with our own paradigm, our own experiences, our own biases, but we really need to stop and let the other person tell their side of the story. What was going on? What was, maybe you could find out information that you didn't know prior to, that now that you're hearing about it from them, they can tell you what else is going on. They can give you more details. Maybe they can shine some light onto the situation that maybe you hadn't thought of before. Okay. In every situation, there is an opportunity to learn if we are willing to really and truly listen to what the other person has to say. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It doesn't mean that you like what it is that they're saying, but just taking the time to listen and consider what they're saying, then you'll have all of the pieces of information that can hopefully help you move forward. And I like this quote because I think it's really true. And if nobody else needs to hear this, then I'm just going to say this to remind myself. The biggest communication is we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. Oftentimes whenever somebody else is talking, we've got this thing like playing in our head, like, okay, well, I'm going to make that point because you said that, and I'm going to make that point because you said that. But we're not really and truly taking in everything the individual has to say if we're playing that narrative in our own minds. Anything that we can do to listen to what they have to say, whenever somebody's talking, I like to write things down. And I even tell the person, while you explain this, I'm going to write things down because I want to make sure that I don't cut you off. But I also want to make sure that I don't forget anything that I want to say too. And in that regard, you're showing that person that you respect them enough to let them talk, but you're establishing that boundary that you're going to have some things to say as well. Okay, so G, we're going to establish some goals. R, we're going to find out the reality of the situation. O, now we're going to start to brainstorm some options. You're going to empower the ability for you and the other person to kind of think through what's going to work and what's not going to work. Now, if we're dealing with a situation where a student has plagiarized, then most of our institutions have some pretty concrete policies and procedures in place for what it is that we can do. If not, hopefully your syllabus has got some pretty concrete information for what you will and will not do should that situation occur. And in that regards, there may not be an opportunity for brainstorming. It's pretty black and white. You plagiarize, therefore you get this grade. Or I caught you cheating, therefore this is going to happen. But if it's not something like that, maybe it's a conversation you're having with your neighbor. Maybe asking them, well, what do you think about this? How can we get some sort of resolution? Here's what I think might be a viable solution. What do you think? And talk through, okay, what are those first steps that we're going to do to have this resolution occur? What else can we do? But also something to think about, what if I don't do anything at all? So what if I just allow this situation to occur? And you could even ask this individual that question. You ask the student, if I let you plagiarize, now that I know that you have plagiarized this assignment and I don't address this to you, how does that reflect on me as an instructor? Would you let somebody get away with that? I mean, ask them those sorts of questions, because in doing that, you're kind of using the R in growth. So the reality of the situation, you're giving that person an opportunity to understand from your perspective why it is that you're having to do what it is that you're having to do. But again, too often times we go into it thinking this is how it's going to be, and I want this person to do what I want them to do, and we don't have that dialogue. Always, always, always go back to the goal. Find out, remember what your goals are, remember what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And if at any point in time your conversation is starting to be derailed such that you're not moving towards that goal, that's kind of your compass to say, nope, we got to get back to this. So for example, if somebody if you're having a conversation with somebody and they say, oh yeah, but so-and-so yada, yada, yada. Okay, well, we can deal with that part later. Right now, we're just trying to focus on this. When my stepdaughter was younger, I had to do that a lot. You know, teenagers being teenagers. Oh yeah, well, also blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, that is that. We'll deal with that in a minute. We need to talk about this part of it though. Let's find resolution to this thing before we move on to the next thing. Okay. The last step in this whole grow model is to put an action plan in place. So what is our way forward? Where does the goal fit in with personal priorities at the moment? What are, again, with our plagiarism example, what are you and the student going to do going forward? If the student decides to plagiarize again, what will your plan be? What is the student going to do to help make sure that they don't plagiarize this assignment again? So work through how it is that we are going to move forward together. And I think a lot of times our students, whenever we do have to have these conversations with them, it makes them feel really embarrassed. I think some of them, it causes them to kind of disconnect from our classrooms. Well, now my professor thinks blah, 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 blah. But if you work with your student and you address like, okay, you made a bad choice, you messed up, you got caught, here's your consequences. Now, what are we going to do to help make sure that this doesn't happen again? Not just in your class, but in all of the students' classes going forward. Okay. And we also have to make sure too that whenever we do have this part of the conversation and we do have the way forward, we can't hold grudges. Oftentimes, whenever we do have a difficult conversation with somebody, anything that we try to do past that, there are some people that want to keep bringing it up and remember that time when, and remember how you, that's not the time to do that. If the person really and truly is trying to move forward, offering those words of encouragement, telling the student, hey, I really appreciate you having that conversation with me, and then continuing to treat them as though nothing happened, because you've already addressed the issue. There's no point in bringing it up again and again and again. But before you implement that, I want to point out this bullet right here. How committed are you to that goal? Because if there is no commitment on one or both sides of the discussion, then it's going to happen again. And it's probably going to come back in greater force because the issue was never addressed with or dealt with in the beginning. Okay. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, we'll get to that in a second. So just to kind of summarize everything, we've got goals. We're going to find out the reality of the situation. We're going to try to brainstorm some different options, and then we're going to move forward. If it does happen again, if there's another situation that happens, we're going to go back to the goals. We're going to reassess the reality, look at the options, and find a way forward. But now, some of you are thinking, okay, Rachel, this all sounds well and good, but you're actually telling me that I need to remain calm, even though my head is about to explode. So this, I'm so livid. I'm so ticked off. I can't believe that this could possibly, how could this person, yada, yada, yada. What we need to remember is oftentimes having an emotional outburst, if you do it in a respectful manner, can actually be really healthy because it shows that you care, right? So caring is a good thing. And there is a lot of educators that are out there that, well, I know the students cheat, but it's whatever. I know that they copied the paper from XYZ, but yeah, I don't care. The fact that you're getting upset is actually a good thing, because that means that you still care. You still care about being an educator. You still care about doing an effective job. And that in and of itself, you should be applauded for. So I'm going to mini applaud you for that. But there are times when you really and truly feel like your head is going to explode. But at the same time, you're trying to maintain that just kind of Zen confidence. Even though you've written down your goals, you understand where they're coming from. We're trying to work through this way forward, but it's just not happening. And you keep headbutting each other, for lack of a better term. If you find yourself in that situation, so if you're not able to work through the situation, if you're not able to talk through suggestions, if this other person is just adamant saying, no, I refuse, I am not going any further, here's a couple of things for you to keep in mind. So that way, again, we keep that parasympathetic nervous system activated. First and foremost, I want for you to try to focus on the areas where you can agree with the individual. So we can agree that plagiarism is wrong. We can agree that you should have done the work earlier. We can agree that you shouldn't have copied this. If it's a fellow colleague, we can agree on this particular item, and we can agree, just find those areas where you can agree, because that can be a really strong foundation to help you move forward. Also, too, always, always, always be open and kind. You never want your emotions to cloud the message. And oftentimes our emotions take over. It completely gets in the way of our ability to communicate. I tell my students that emotions are kind of like sparklers. You light them and they're really strong, really bright, really cool for about 30 seconds. And then afterwards, you're just kind of left with, eh. If you react in that sparkler moment, it's going to linger, and it's going to make it that much harder for people to have that way forward in dealing with any sort of issues that might come up. Again, you want to try to remember the conversation goals that you established early on. I am a firm believer in writing things down. And so not only whenever I go into a conversation while the other person is talking, do I write things out, but then I also make sure that I have my goals there at the top. And I know it sounds redundant, and I know that we've got 1,000 things that are going on, but that little piece of paper with those goals can be really helpful. And even if you have to put little reminders in there of, this too shall pass, or, I just, keep your mouth shut until you have an opportunity, whatever little coaching phrases you need to include on your paper, I really encourage you to do that, because again, you don't want your emotions to cloud your message. We also need to understand that we may not be able to change the other person's mind. It very well could be that we are not going to come to a resolution. So in my organization, there is a situation where a student is caught on camera plagiarizing. Thankfully, not within my department, but heard from a colleague, caught on camera plagiarizing, and has escalated it up to a level 3. It's like, come on, you are on camera cheating during a test, but the student is adamant they were not cheating, has gone to HR saying that there's, employees are out to get him, and all sorts of things, right? You very well may not be able to change the other person's mind. And before you go into a conversation, you should know that and accept it. Having a high degree of emotional intelligence can be really helpful with this. People that have a high emotional intelligence level, they are not easily triggered by the opinions of others. They're very confident in who they are as a person. They're willing to entertain the opinions and perspectives of other people without necessarily taking them on as their own. And if you can go into it knowing, this may not work out the way that I want for it to, you're already setting yourself up for success, because you're not creating unrealistic expectations. And I know that I am guilty of that sometimes. I have unrealistic expectations for what I think may or may not occur. But the more that we can accept, this may not work out the way that I want it to, we'll be in the right position. And then finally, sometimes it's just important to know when to end a conversation. Having a 3, 4, 5, God forbid, 6, 7, 8 power session of discussion about a particular topic, and this is probably more pertinent to family members or spouse or whatever, that's just not productive. If you get to a point where you and the other person are at an impasse, it might be best to say, look, we've talked about this for the last couple of hours. We're in a position that we can't really go any further on. How about we table it, and we'll set up a time next week to continue the dialogue. Sometimes having that moment of pause, whether it's a 10-minute pause or a 5-day pause, can be really valuable, because it gives both parties an opportunity to reflect it certainly gives an opportunity for our emotions to kind of die down so we can think through the situation a little bit more logically and approach it with more realistic expectations. But even if all of that doesn't seem to work, I have to quote the late, great Kenny Rogers, and I'm sure many of you would know the song, you got to know when to hold them, you got to know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. There are just some conversations that are not going to have progress, and having that discernment to realize I have done everything that I possibly can to try and have this conversation with you. We've explored different options, but you keep trying to cross my boundary that I'm not willing to compromise on. It's okay to just say, you know what, this is not going to work. You at that time may need to include additional people in the conversation. It could be a situation where with that plagiarizing student, maybe you go to your department chair, maybe you go to your assistant dean and say, look, this is everything that I have done. I cannot do anymore. I need to tap you in to help me get some resolution with this. And depending upon your institution's policies and procedures, and depending upon the relationship that you have with those leaders in your organization, then you can determine what's going to be the best thing. And as all good academics do, here's some references and resources for you. And going back to that whole idea of leadership, I really do believe that that's a key component, because so many of us don't feel comfortable having certain conversations at some of our institutions, because many of you may feel like you don't have leadership support. Thankfully, I do have that. I'm in a fortunate position where I do, but I know that there's many of you out there from, east to west that maybe you don't feel like you have that. Leadership development is a huge thing, and it can be really, really valuable. And leadership is not your title. Every single academic person that teaches is a leader in their classroom. And so because I believe so much in this, and I believe that this has such an impact on our organization, I did create a podcast. So if you want to go check it out, that's where to do so. But I mean, at this time, I'm more than willing to take any sort of questions that somebody might have. I know that this is kind of an uncomfortable topic that makes some people squirm, but the more that we can kind of logically talk through some viable solutions, it might give you some tools in your tool belt to help you if you have to have these conversations in the future.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gallardo, for all the valuable information that you shared with us today. If you do have any questions and want to enter those in now, you can use the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom room screen, and we'll just give that a minute or two if anyone has anything that they want to ask or anything they want to contribute.
And I'll go ahead and post my email there too, in case anybody wants to touch base after the conference.
Looks like we don't have any questions at this time. Our next concurrent session will begin at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So you can view the chat for session meeting room links or access to the conference website for a complete list of concurrent sessions and their descriptions. It looks like we actually did have a question just come through from Angela. So she says, how can I access the answer to the first question that was asked about overconfidence? Looks like she might have had a technical difficulty at that time.
Overconfidence as far as, I'm not sure I understand the question.
I believe that might have been from a prior session, actually.
Okay.
Oh, gotcha. And then it looks like Cassandra said, when you reach that impasse, what are some strategies to move forward in future attempts?
So let's say you do try to have that conversation and you are at an impasse. I mean, I would start those steps over again, set up a good time, follow up with the person and say, I know that you and I weren't able to come to some sort of an agreement the last time we talked about this. but it is important to me. And I hope that, you would be open to having another conversation about it. When would be a good time for the two of us to kind of get together and discuss it further? Sometimes we have to realize that the other person may not want to talk about it. There are just some people that they just don't. And part of that, I don't think it's because they don't want to have a resolution. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people don't like to be uncomfortable. And if we can get to a point where we become comfortable with being uncomfortable, we can start to have those dialogues a lot more easily, and we can have those open lines of communication. But so often this is an uncomfortable topic, so I don't want to talk about anything. I don't want to upset the person. Well, sometimes that's what we have to do for there to be growth and for there to be change within our institutions. We have to make our students sometimes just a little uncomfortable so that way they can grow and learn in the areas that they need to learn in. But just, if that person does agree to say, okay, yes, let's try to have this conversation again, the fact that they're willing to do so shows you their motivation, which is awesome. And then you go back to the growth steps. Okay, what are our goals? Because your goals may have changed from the last time you guys talked to talking now. There might be new information that came to light. There might be a change in direction. I mean, there's any number of factors that could have changed things. But then just come back to the table, and when you have that conversation, say, look, I know that we weren't able to come to an agreement or any sort of resolution the first time around. Thank you so much for taking the time for us to have this conversation again. Hopefully we're a little bit more productive, or we can at least get further along this time around. There are some conversations it might take 3 or 4 different times. When somebody goes to see a psychologist, you don't just walk in there and talk to them an hour and everything is fixed. It's generally repeated sessions over and over and over again until a final resolution has occurred. In some situations, that may need to happen. It might be one and done, but it could be 3 or 4 different discussions before you finally get to the meat and finally get to a resolution of what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. We have a few more questions that are kind of popping in now. One question asks, will these strategies apply to interpersonal relationships?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I have 2 stepdaughters. I use these for when I have conversations with them. With family members, I've had to use this before. With my own husband, I've had to use this before. The biggest thing is if you've got both parties and they're willing to commit to having the conversation, that is always the hardest challenge. So if both sides are willing and in agreement, okay, yes, we do need to talk about this, let's talk about it, that you can't replace. If only one person is willing to talk, it doesn't matter how many models or sessions, none of that other stuff matters, because the other person is shut down. Having both parties are willing to have the conversation is really key. And it's timely too with I don't know if anybody else is a baseball fan, but I've definitely been trying to follow some of those negotiations. And it's like, oh man, we got to figure this out. What can we do? What's the problem? Why can't we start our games? And I'm curious if what is happening at that impasse phase, if there's escalating emotions during those conversations, or if they're allowing themselves to kind of have those pauses and then continue the dialogue afterwards. So it can work for interpersonal relationships as well.
Okay. This next one asks, would you recommend this technique to students to use when doing group projects? When would be a good time for a leader to intervene?
I think it depends on the students. So if you're talking about freshman students versus senior students, there's a level of cognitive development there that's very big. Keep in mind that our brains don't fully reach full maturation until 25-ish to 27-ish. So if you're dealing with a group that's mostly 18, 19 years old, your frontal lobe with the reasoning, decision-making, critical thinking, logic, all of that is not going to be as developed as a group of students that are maybe 23, 24 years old. As an instructor, if you're walking around and just kind of observing things, it's okay for you to listen in and then maybe interject whenever you see that there's some issues that are going on. Obviously, if you can see that there's high emotional situations that are happening, as the instructor, you certainly want to step in, not only for student safety, but then also to kind of try to activate that logical reasoning decision-making portion of their brain. But it could just very well be that you say, look, until you guys can talk to each other in a respectful manner, we're not gonna have this discussion. So hopefully the next time you guys come back to class, we've had some time to cool our heads a little bit, and we can reassess what's going on. And I'll help the group kind of walk through what we need to walk through, so that way a decision can be made.
Right. This next one, I think Angela was just kind of addressing what her question was at the beginning. She says, I sometimes attempt to open a conversation about a topic with the entire class, only to find that one of the students wants to answer for the entire group. It was not based on a sort of one-to-one student interaction.
Mm-hmm. I like to use a popcorn strategy in my class. So if I have a student that, my extroverts, they're always wanting to blurt things out, then I may have that person say, okay, now you have to pick somebody else in the class to answer. And then maybe do that 3 or 4 different rounds. Not only does it help make sure that everybody in the class is participating, but it also prevents the instructor or prevents me from being the person where she keeps picking on me, she keeps calling on me. You can also pull that extroverted, that's over, I don't want to say overly zealous, but that just real eager beaver in your class, pull them to the side and say, I really appreciate the enthusiasm that you bring to the class. And I know that you know this material, and I mean, you are just doing an amazing job, but I really want to make sure that I hear from the other students in the class too. So the next time you want to answer something, can you maybe count to 10 for me before you answer? That way it gives other people in the class an opportunity to speak too. When I've mentioned that to a couple of my extroverted students, they've actually taken that really well. And sometimes in one case, the student turned to the rest of the class and be like, it shouldn't just be a one-man show. What else do y'all have to say? And he kind of encouraged the rest of the class to talk, and it became a lot easier from there. So that's a couple different strategies that I would use.
Yeah. This next one says, you talked about not having emotions overcloud the message, but some people speak passionately. That's kind of their natural voice. So does the grow steps require that the person deliver a message differently?
No. The grow steps, because whenever we do show some emotion, that shows commitment. I think I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown, and I agree with her from an authenticity standpoint, from a transparency standpoint. I think it's okay to show some sort of vulnerability, but I also think it's important for us to use clear, logical reasons for why somebody should or should not be doing something, whatever the situation is that you're having to talk to them about. So you don't want to be too overly emotional, but you also don't want to be robotic. And that's why having those goals in place can be really helpful, because it gives you, again, a compass for what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And we didn't get into it, but there's a central route to persuasion, and there's also a decentral route to persuasion. The central route to persuasion is more logical, whereas the decentralized route to persuasion is more emotional and more on a subconscious basis. And depending upon whatever the topic is, that might determine which way you go. You never want to be robotic. You never want to be unauthentic, but you also don't want to be too emotional either. Right.
Always got to find that good balance, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's okay to kind of toggle back and forth between the two. Our policy says that because you plagiarize, this X, Y, Z of what needs to occur. And that's really unfortunate, because I think that you're a really strong student. I think you're fully capable of doing this assignment, but because of your actions, this is what we're going to have to do. What can I do to help you to make sure that this isn't an issue in any future class? So you have that balance of the logical and the emotional brought together.
No. And then it looks like we have one other question right now. What if the other person doesn't want to have any conversation or refuses to talk?
So you have a student that's just kind of, I'm going to stand my ground and I'm not saying a word. I mean, that's their right. And you can, I would just call them out on it and say, well, I can see that you're not willing to discuss this issue right now. I've told you my stance on it. And, depending upon the issue, if we're talking about a student plagiarism issue, you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. Here's what it is that I have to do. I am going to send you a follow-up email just to reconfirm what it is that I discussed with you during this meeting. So that way you've got record for yourself for what happened. But if it's another situation, if it's more personal in nature, or if it's with another colleague, maybe try to broach the issue in a couple of weeks and say, look, we haven't had a chance to discuss. I really don't want to have this silent treatment go on between the two of us. I value you as a colleague, I value you as a friend, and I hope that you're willing to have a conversation with me about this particular issue. I'm a firm believer in addressing any elephant in the room, because your department knows if two people aren't talking to each other. Like, everybody in the department knows if people are not getting along, and that's just not healthy, because it does permeate out to our students. And anything we can do to prevent that from happening, we should really and truly make every effort to do so.
Right. It doesn't look like we have any other questions at the moment. Thank you again, Dr. Gallardo, for this wonderful session, and a lot of really great questions that have come through to kind of open up that discussion. Again, our next session will begin at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And if you look at the chat, you can click on any of those links to access different sessions and their descriptions. We also have the conference website where you can swing by the exhibit hall to say hello to the Hawks team, view a quick 5-minute demonstration, and be entered to win the hourly giveaway for your choice of a 6-month subscription to Audible, 1-year subscription to Disney Plus, or a $100 Amazon gift card. So we hope to see you at your next session. Thank you all again.
Thanks, everybody.